Tasha Williams walked into the crowded courthouse with a sense of purpose, her steps echoing on the cold marble floors. She was used to the tension that came with being in a courtroom, but today felt different. She had a client to represent a simple case, a traffic fine that should have been quick and easy. Her client had gotten a parking ticket during a busy workday, and Tasha knew how to handle such minor issues with ease. As a seasoned attorney, she had done it hundreds of times before she knew exactly what to say to make the case go smoothly. What she didn't anticipate was the way Judge Thompson would respond. Judge Thompson was a man of routine, a no-nonsense type of figure in the legal world. He had built a reputation for being tough on anyone who dared question his rulings. Many lawyers dreaded appearing before him, but Tasha had dealt with him before, and always with grace. She had earned her respect within the courthouse for being both knowledgeable and composed, so as she entered the courtroom, she felt confident that this would be another straightforward case. The room was filled with murmurs as the various cases were called before the judge. Tasha sat patiently waiting for her client's name to be read. When it was their turn, she stood up and made her way to the front of the room. The judge glanced up briefly, not acknowledging her presence, but his eyes fixed on the case before him. With a quick flick of his hand, he motioned for her to proceed. Tasha began her argument, presenting the facts of the case. She spoke calmly, explaining that her client had been in a rush that day and hadn't realized they had parked in a restricted zone. She highlighted how her client had no previous tickets and how the fine was truly an oversight. Nothing more. The judge listened without expression as she spoke, but Tasha couldn't help but notice a subtle shift in his demeanor. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was dismissing her every word. Before she could finish her explanation, he cut her off. "Enough," he said, his voice sharp and commanding. "It's clear this is nothing more than a petty mistake. I'm issuing the fine, no exceptions." Tasha paused momentarily, taken aback by his abruptness. She had dealt with tough judges before, but something about this felt different. She tried to explain further, but he raised his hand dismissively. "I've heard enough," he continued. "The fine stands, and that's final." His words were final, and as he slammed his gavel down, the case was over just like that. Tasha stood there for a moment in stunned silence. It wasn't the fine itself that bothered her, it was the way he had dismissed her so easily. Her experience, her reasoning, none of it had mattered in that moment. She felt a slight sting in her chest, but she quickly masked it with professionalism. She had learned long ago that showing frustration in the courtroom could never help her cause. With a composed nod, she accepted the ruling and turned to leave. But as she walked out of the courtroom, her mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the entire exchange. She knew it wasn't just about a simple traffic fine. There was something deeper at play, something personal. She wasn't sure yet, but she intended to find out. As Tasha left the courtroom, the cool air outside felt like a relief from the stuffy tension that had built up inside. She stood for a moment, her thoughts swirling. Her mind replayed every word, every gesture from Judge Thompson, trying to understand what had gone wrong. It wasn't just the fine that bothered her. It was the dismissive tone, the refusal to even listen. She had come across tough judges before, but none had made her feel so invisible. She brushed it off for the moment, focusing on her next steps. After all, there were bigger battles to fight. But something in her gut told her this wasn't over. Back at her office, Tasha sat at her desk, reviewing her notes. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, asking how the case had gone. She responded briefly, just saying fine to keep it simple, but the words didn't feel right. She stared at the screen, her thoughts shifting to the bigger picture. She was the president of the Bar Association, the leader of a powerful network of lawyers, and she had worked tirelessly for years to bring fairness and transparency to the legal system. She had earned the respect of her peers, fought for countless reforms, and worked on initiatives to improve diversity within the profession. But today, it felt like none of that mattered. Today, she had been reduced to just another lawyer in a courtroom, disregarded and dismissed. The more she thought about it, the more the injustice of it all sank in. It wasn't just her pride that was hurt. It was the way the legal system had treated her client, and the way it continued to treat people like him. People from underrepresented communities who often found themselves at the mercy of a system that didn't seem to care. Tasha had seen it before, The subtle biases, the quiet racism, the way certain people were always on the losing end of the system, no matter how hard they fought. And today she realized that it had been her client, and it had been her too. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. This time it was a message from Javier, a fellow lawyer and a close friend who worked in civil rights law. He was one of the few people who truly understood the weight of Tasha's leadership role in the legal world, and she trusted his judgment implicitly. "Did you see what happened in there?" His message read. "You didn't deserve that. This isn't just about one case. We need to talk. Meet me tonight." Tasha sighed, running a hand through her hair. She had been planning to take the evening off, but something about Javier's message made it clear that this situation wouldn't wait. She replied with a simple, "I'll be there." Later that evening, they met at a quiet cafe, far from the hustle and bustle of the courthouse. As they sat down, Tasha's thoughts spilled out, everything she had been feeling since the moment Judge Thompson had dismissed her. Javier listened carefully, nodding as she spoke, his expression grave but supportive. "I know you," he said finally, after a long pause. "And I know that feeling. You're not just mad about the fine. You're mad about how this keeps happening, how the system just keeps brushing people like us aside, no matter how hard we work to change it. The truth is, it's not about one case, Tasha. This is about something much bigger. This is about respect." Tasha nodded, feeling a weight in her chest. Javier was right. It was about respect. It was about the way she, as a black woman, had been treated in a space where she had worked so hard to prove her worth. It was about the deep-rooted biases that still held sway over even the most experienced professionals, even those in positions of power. Javier leaned forward. "What are you going to do about it?" Tasha's gaze hardened. She had already made up her mind. "I'm going to take this to the Bar Association. Not just about this case, about all the cases where people like us get ignored or mistreated. Judge Thompson won't be the last to do this, but he'll be the first to pay for it." Javier smiled faintly. "I knew you were going to say that. You've always known how to fight. But don't forget, you're not alone in this." Tasha nodded, a sense of resolve settling over her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something far larger, a movement to hold those in power accountable and ensure that no one else had to experience what she had. The real work was just beginning. The next few days felt like a whirlwind to Tasha. Every time she tried to focus on her usual caseload, her mind kept returning to the confrontation in Judge Thompson's courtroom. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had to be done, not just for her, but for every lawyer who had ever been dismissed or undermined simply because of their background. It wasn't just about one arrogant judge. It was about a system that allowed this kind of treatment to continue unchecked. By the end of the week, Tasha had made her decision. She was going to bring the issue to the Bar Association, but she couldn't do it alone. The support of her colleagues was crucial, especially given the potential fallout from challenging a figure as powerful as Judge Thompson. Tasha began reaching out to a few trusted allies within the bar, knowing that if she was going to make real change, she needed to rally support from those who shared her vision. Javier was the first to reach out after their meeting, already beginning to lay the groundwork for what was to come. He had spoken with a few civil rights advocates and even some judges who were sympathetic to Tasha's cause. Word was starting to spread, and what had initially seemed like an isolated incident was beginning to catch the attention of a much larger audience. The following Monday, Tasha called for a meeting at the Bar Association's office. She invited a select group of lawyers, activists, and legal reformists to come together and discuss how they could address what had happened in Judge Thompson's courtroom. As she entered the meeting room, Tasha was met with a sea of familiar faces. People who had been in the trenches with her during previous legal battles, individuals who were just as committed to justice as she was. She knew the stakes were high, but this was a group that could make a difference. The room went silent as Tasha took her seat at the head of the table. She cleared her throat, then began speaking with a calm but firm voice. "What happened to me in that courtroom wasn't an isolated incident," she began. "It's part of a larger issue that exists within our legal system, one that dismisses the voices of those who are different, who don't look like the people in power. Today, I'm asking for your support in holding not just Judge Thompson accountable, but the system that allows judges like him to act with impunity. The room was still for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. Then Brian a colleague who had worked alongside Tasha on previous civil rights cases, spoke up. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "It's not just about one case, it's about a pattern. There's been a long-standing issue with how people of color are treated in the courts, especially when it comes to minor cases. Judges like Thompson may not always act overtly racist, but their biases are baked into their decisions. It's time we start addressing that head-on." Tasha nodded, grateful for the support. "Exactly. We're not just talking about one judge. We're talking about a system that tolerates this behavior, that allows bias to slip through the cracks. We can't keep ignoring it." The discussion quickly picked up steam as more voices joined in, each lawyer offering their perspectives on the state of the legal system and the need for reform. Some suggested launching a public campaign. Others proposed organizing legal workshops to raise awareness about systemic bias. Tasha listened carefully, knowing that this was a critical moment in her fight for justice. She didn't want to act impulsively, but she also knew that if they didn't act now, the momentum would slip away. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. The Bar Association would begin a formal investigation into Judge Thompson's conduct, using Tasha's case as a starting point. The goal wasn't just to challenge one judge, but to open a broader conversation about bias in the courts. They also decided to hold a public hearing, inviting legal experts, activists, and members of the community to weigh in on the issue. As Tasha left the meeting, her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. This was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, and there were likely to be powerful people who would try to silence them. But as she looked around the faces of the people who had gathered in that room, she knew they were all in this together. And together, they could start to make real change. The following week, as Tasha prepared to meet with her colleagues again, she felt the weight of the decision she'd made. The wheels were in motion now. A formal investigation into Judge Thompson's actions was underway, and the Bar Association had begun to gather evidence, including testimonies from other attorneys who had experienced similar dismissals in the courtroom. It was clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. The more they dug, the more they uncovered stories of bias and subtle prejudices within the judicial system that had long been swept under the rug. Despite the progress, Tasha couldn't shake the sense of urgency. She knew this was bigger than just one judge. It was a system that needed reform, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized how much work was ahead of them. The public hearing was scheduled to take place in a few weeks, but before that, she needed to meet with Judge Thompson again. The first meeting hadn't gone well, but Tasha had learned that sometimes the most direct approach could be the most effective. If she could get him to understand the broader implications of his actions, perhaps he would take responsibility and avoid a drawn-out battle that could damage the credibility of the court. Tasha requested a private meeting with the judge. She wasn't sure if he'd accept, after all. He had already dismissed her so quickly during their previous encounter. But much to her surprise, his office called back the next day to schedule a time. The day of the meeting, Tasha walked into the judge's chambers with a sense of quiet confidence. She had spent the night preparing her arguments, anticipating every excuse or deflection he might throw her way. When she entered, Judge Thompson was seated behind his large wooden desk, his usual stern demeanor in place. He didn't stand to greet her, but he did gesture to the chair across from him. Tasha took a seat, watching him carefully. His eyes remained cold, but there was a flicker of something else behind them. Maybe it was guilt or uncertainty, but she wasn't about to assume anything. She would need to press him, gently but firmly. "Judge Thompson," she began, keeping her tone respectful but unyielding. "I wanted to meet with you to discuss what happened in your courtroom the other day. I understand that you likely didn't realize the full context of my involvement in the legal community when we last spoke, but I believe we need to have a candid conversation about how we move forward." The judge folded his hands, his eyes narrowing slightly. I've been in this business long enough to know how things work. Ms. Williams, he replied, his voice tinged with a touch of defensiveness. I didn't mean any offense, and I don't appreciate your insinuation that I was dismissive or prejudiced. Tasha held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. It's not about whether you meant offense, she said calmly. It's about the reality of what your actions represent. The way you dismissed me wasn't just disrespectful. It was a reflection of something much deeper. I've worked hard to earn the respect of my colleagues, my clients, and my community. I'm not just any lawyer. I'm the president of the Bar Association, and when you dismiss me, you're dismissing everything I stand for. For a moment, there was silence between them. Tasha could feel the tension hanging in the air, but she wasn't going to let him off the hook so easily. This wasn't about personal pride. It was about fairness, accountability, and respect. You have a reputation as a fair and impartial judge, she continued. But that's only true if you are willing to acknowledge and confront the biases that can cloud your judgment. Your actions, however small they may seem, contribute to a larger issue of inequality within the justice system. And it's not just about me. It's about everyone who walks through that courtroom, hoping to be treated fairly. Judge Thompson looked down at his hands, his lips pressed together in thought. He hadn't expected this. Tasha had come to him not with anger or accusations, but with clarity and purpose. She was holding a mirror up to him, forcing him to see the impact of his behavior. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. I didn't realize the full extent of your involvement, but I see now that I made a mistake. I didn't give you the respect you deserve, and for that, I apologize. Tasha nodded, but she didn't allow herself to feel relieved just yet. An apology is a good start, she said, but actions speak louder than words. I hope you'll take this opportunity to reflect on how you treat everyone in your courtroom, because this isn't just about me, about ensuring that no one else is ever dismissed or overlooked in the way I was. The judge didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the papers on his desk, deep in thought. Tasha had made her point, but the real question was whether he would take responsibility for the wider issue or simply move on, hoping it would blow over. As Tasha stood to leave, she felt a cautious optimism. This conversation was a step in the right direction, but she knew that the true test would come when the Bar Association's investigation began. Would Judge Thompson truly change, or would he resist the growing call for accountability? Only time would tell, but Tasha was ready for whatever came next. She had already made her decision. She wasn't backing down. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions. Tasha had expected some pushback after her conversation with Judge Thompson, but what she didn't anticipate was how quickly word of the private meeting had spread. Whispers began circulating through the courthouse. Some of her colleagues were supportive, while others questioned her decision to approach the judge so directly. But what mattered most was the support she received from the Bar Association. The investigation into Judge Thompson's conduct had gained traction, and soon, it wasn't just about a single incident. It was a broader conversation about racial and gender bias in the courtroom. Tasha knew that the public hearing was fast approaching, and she couldn't afford to let distractions derail her efforts. She threw herself into preparations, ensuring that the case against Judge Thompson was thorough and compelling. But despite her professionalism, there were moments when doubts crept in. She had chosen to confront an entrenched system, one that was not going to change easily. And there was no guarantee that the Bar Association would stand behind her if the political winds shifted. One evening, as she was preparing her notes for the hearing, Tasha's phone buzzed. It was a text from Javier ***. You need to see this. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She quickly opened the message, which contained a link to an article. The headline read, Bar Association President takes on corrupt judge. Is this the beginning of a new legal era? Her stomach twisted. She clicked the link, scanning through the article. It wasn't written by a major outlet, but it had clearly gained some traction in the legal community. The writer, a freelance journalist, had somehow gotten access to internal communications within the Bar Association. It seemed that the article was painting her as a crusader, someone leading a charge against a corrupt judge and the systemic issues within the legal system. While part of her was proud of the attention, another part of her felt uneasy. She hadn't sought the spotlight. She had simply wanted justice. Tasha immediately texted Javier back. Asterisk, what's going on? Who leaked this? Asterisk. Javier's response was swift. Asterisk, no idea, but it's spreading fast. This could be good or bad, depending on how it's handled. The powers that be won't be happy. You should prepare for a storm. Asterisk. Tasha's mind raced. She had been focused on the legal strategy, on the facts, on the testimony. Now it seemed like her personal reputation was at stake. This wasn't just about the courtroom anymore. The media was involved, and she knew the risks of a public scandal. If they framed her as an opportunist or an attention seeker, it could derail everything she had worked for. But if they framed her as a champion for justice, it could galvanize the public and put even more pressure on the Bar Association to act. As the days ticked by, Tasha found herself more and more immersed in the public relations side of the fight. She began working with a communications consultant who specialized in legal matters. They crafted statements, prepared for interviews, and managed the narrative that was quickly taking shape. Tasha was determined to control the conversation as much as she could to ensure that the focus remained on the issue at hand: bias in the courtroom, the need for reform, and the importance of holding judges accountable. On the eve of the public hearing, Tasha stood in front of the mirror in her office, taking a deep breath. The weight of the situation had never felt heavier. She wasn't just fighting for her own dignity anymore. She was fighting for every lawyer and every citizen who had ever been marginalized by a biased legal system. But she also knew the stakes had changed. The spotlight was on her now, and there was no turning back. The hearing would be the ultimate test. Would Judge Thompson appear and defend himself, or would he remain silent and let the accusations pile up? Would the Bar Association's investigation move forward without obstruction? And most importantly, would they find the courage to confront the deeper issues of bias in the legal system, or would it all be swept under the rug once again? Tasha had come too far to back down now. Tomorrow, she would face the storm head-on. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore. She was a symbol of change. The day of the public hearing arrived, and Tasha stood outside the Bar Association's grand conference room, her heart pounding in her chest. A sense of anticipation hung in the air, and she knew that this moment wasn't just about Judge Thompson. It was about an entire system that had, for too long, ignored its biases and allowed those in power to operate with impunity. The media had shown up in full force, the article about her battle with the judge having exploded across legal circles and beyond. Tasha knew that all eyes would be on her, but she wasn't sure whether that would help or hurt her cause. As she walked into the room, the atmosphere was electric. Lawyers, journalists, activists, and members of the public were all gathered, some sitting in the audience, others milling around in hushed conversations. Tasha took a deep breath before making her way to the front of the room, where a long, polished table was set up for the panel. At the far end, she spotted Javier who had been instrumental in organizing this hearing. He gave her a reassuring nod, and she smiled in return, grateful for his unwavering support. She seated herself at the table, her notes in front of her, prepared to make her case. The proceedings began with opening remarks from the Bar Association's chairman, who acknowledged the gravity of the situation and emphasized the importance of addressing biases in the legal system. But Tasha's mind wasn't on the words being spoken. She was focused on what was coming next. The witnesses, the testimonies, the hard evidence. It was all about to unfold. When it was finally her turn to speak, she stood, her gaze scanning the room for a moment. The room fell silent. She knew this wasn't just a legal battle, it was a public reckoning. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, "thank you for being here today. I stand before you not as an individual seeking to settle a personal grievance, but as someone who has witnessed firsthand the way biases can shape decisions in our legal system. It is not enough to simply acknowledge that these biases exist. We must confront them head-on." Tasha paused, making sure her words landed with the gravity they deserved. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, but it didn't faze her. This was what she had worked for. I was in Judge Thompson's courtroom, she continued, representing a client who had received a minor traffic fine. I laid out the facts, as I always do, but Judge Thompson dismissed me with little more than a wave of his hand. In that moment, I wasn't just dismissed as a lawyer. I was dismissed as a woman of color, as someone who had earned her place in this profession, but was still perceived as other. I am not the only one who has faced this. For years, people of color, women, and marginalized communities have found themselves subjected to the same treatment. And it's not just about one judge. It's about a system that allows this behavior to continue unchecked. There was a murmur in the room. Some nodded in agreement, while others appeared uncomfortable. Tasha didn't back down. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. What we are asking for today is accountability, she said, looking directly at the panel of senior bar members. We need to hold those in positions of power accountable for their actions. We need to ensure that no one, regardless of their race, gender, or background, is treated with less respect or given less of a voice simply because they don't fit the mold of what a good lawyer should look like. Her words rang in the room, and for the first time since she'd walked in, Tasha felt a deep sense of clarity. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every lawyer who had ever been belittled or undermined, for every client who had been treated unfairly in court. She was giving a voice to the countless others who didn't have the platform she did. As Tasha spoke, the room seemed to settle into a quiet intensity, the weight of her words resonating with those present. She had expected resistance, but what surprised her was the overwhelming support from some quarters. Several lawyers on the panel, many of whom had long held positions of power in the bar, were visibly moved. One of them, Diane a respected senior partner known for her advocacy and diversity, spoke up. Tasha, what you're saying resonates with me more than you know, Diane said, her voice soft but strong. I've been in this field for decades, and I've seen how easily we dismiss the experiences of those who don't look like the norm. You're right. We can no longer ignore this. We owe it to our clients, our colleagues, and ourselves to do better. The room buzzed with agreement. It was clear that Tasha's call for accountability had struck a chord. But it wasn't just the people who were already sympathetic to her cause. It was the others, the ones who had been skeptical, who were beginning to listen more closely. The conversation had shifted, and Tasha was no longer just a lone voice in the room. She had become the catalyst for a larger movement. As the hearing continued, Tasha knew that the real work was only just beginning. The fight for justice was far from over, and there would be challenges ahead. But in that moment, surrounded by those who had heard her message and were willing to stand with her, Tasha realized one thing. She was no longer fighting alone. And together, they could begin to change the very fabric of the legal system. The public hearing had shifted the momentum, and Tasha could feel the weight of change beginning to build. By the end of the day, it was clear that the conversation was no longer just about one judge or one case. It was about a much deeper issue, an issue that had been simmering in the legal system for years, but had rarely been addressed in such a direct and public way. Tasha had become the face of this shift, but she was well aware that this was only the beginning. In the days following the hearing, the pressure on Judge Thompson mounted. The media coverage had exploded, with several major legal publications picking up the story. There were even op-eds written in support of Tasha's call for reform. Public figures, including civil rights leaders and legal scholars, weighed in, applauding her bravery and the Bar Association's efforts to address systemic bias in the legal profession. But with the support came criticism, particularly from those within the more traditional corners of the legal world. Some accused her of overblowing the issue, others questioned her integrity, suggesting that she was seeking personal gain or political power. Tasha took it all in stride. She had always known that doing the right thing would come with its fair share of opposition, but it only made her resolve stronger. What bothered her more than the criticism, however, was the quiet pushback she received from within the bar itself. Some of the senior members, while outwardly supportive, were subtly distancing themselves from the matter. They had shown their public support, but behind closed doors, it was clear they were hesitant about the deeper ramifications of the investigation. One afternoon, as Tasha was reviewing documents for the next phase of the investigation, she received a call from Javier. Have you seen the latest news? He asked, his voice filled with concern. Tasha rubbed her forehead, already anticipating what he was about to say. What now? There's word going around that the Bar Association might try to push this whole investigation under the rug. Some of the higher-ups are getting cold feet. They're worried about the backlash from powerful figures in the judiciary and politics. Tasha felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. She had known that pushing for real change would face resistance, but hearing that the very institution she was fighting for might abandon the cause was a bitter pill to swallow. Is there anything we can do? Javier sighed. We need to keep the pressure on. If they think they can sweep this under the rug, they'll keep doing it. We have to expose the truth, and we need to make sure the public sees that this isn't just about one judge or one case. It's about the entire system. We need more voices, more witnesses, people who are willing to speak out, even if it costs them. Tasha knew he was right. She couldn't let the Bar Association backpedal now, not after all the progress they had made. But she also knew that they couldn't win this fight without greater support. She needed to bring in more allies, more voices to stand beside her. That evening, Tasha contacted several lawyers and civil rights leaders who had supported her from the beginning. She also reached out to some members of the media who had been instrumental in giving her story a platform. They needed to rally together, to turn this issue into a movement that couldn't be ignored. The next few days were a whirlwind. Tasha and her team organized a press conference to call for the Bar Association's continued investigation into Judge Thompson. The conference was packed with reporters and legal experts, all eager to hear what Tasha had to say. She stood at the podium, flanked by several key allies who had pledged their support. As many of you know, she began, what we are dealing with here is bigger than one judge, one case, or even one courtroom. This is about a systemic issue of bias that has long existed in our legal system. What happened to me in Judge Thompson's courtroom was not an isolated event. I was one of the lucky ones, able to speak out, to use my platform to demand justice. But many others are silenced. Many others will never have the chance to stand up for themselves. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. I'm calling on the Bar Association to continue its investigation and to hold not only Judge Thompson accountable, but also to take a hard look at the systems that allow biases to persist unchecked. This is about fairness, about justice for everyone. We cannot afford to let this issue be swept under the rug any longer. The room was silent for a moment, and then the questions came. Reporters fired off questions, some about the specifics of the investigation, others about what steps would be taken next. Tasha answered each one with poise, making it clear that she would not back down, no matter the obstacles. She could feel the momentum growing. It was no longer just her fight. It was a fight for the entire legal community, for anyone who had ever been marginalized or overlooked. But as the press conference ended and the cameras faded, Tasha knew the hardest part was still ahead. The Bar Association's investigation was just beginning, and she wasn't sure if it would lead to real change. What she did know was that she couldn't afford to stop now. If they stopped, if they gave up, everything would go back to the way it had been. So she pressed on, determined to make sure this moment wasn't wasted. She was going to keep fighting, because justice had no time to wait. The weeks following the press conference were a blur of strategy meetings, late-night calls, and growing media attention. Tasha had become a household name, the face of a movement calling for transparency and accountability in the judicial system. But with that fame came immense pressure. The stakes were higher than ever, and the opponents she was facing were no longer just judges and legal figures. They were powerful, entrenched interests that had controlled the narrative for decades. As the investigation into Judge Thompson's conduct continued, the Bar Association found itself in a precarious position. The pressure from the public and media was mounting, and Tasha's supporters were relentless. A few members of the bar, those who had privately hoped the issue would fizzle out, began to show cracks in their resolve. But Tasha wasn't backing down. The issue was bigger than any one individual, and she knew that if this moment passed without significant change, it would be a lost opportunity for reform. One morning, as she sat in her office preparing for another round of interviews, Tasha received an unexpected phone call. It was from Diane the senior partner from the bar who had stood by her since the beginning. Tasha, Diane's voice was tense. I need you to come down here. We've got a serious situation. Tasha felt a knot form in her stomach. What's going on? There's been a major development. We've gotten our hands on new evidence. I think it's something you need to see in person. It could change everything. Tasha quickly gathered her things and rushed to Diane's office. When she arrived, Diane was pacing the floor, her face drawn with concern. What is it? Tasha asked, her heart pounding. Diane handed her a folder, her hands shaking slightly. It's documents from a confidential source inside the courthouse. Judge Thompson's behavior wasn't just a one-off incident. We got proof that he's been making biased decisions for years, decisions that have directly impacted cases involving minority communities. Tasha flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the damning evidence. There were internal memos, case files, and even audio recordings that confirmed what many had suspected but never been able to prove. It was clear now that Judge Thompson's actions were part of a broader pattern, not just an isolated incident. This is everything we need, Tasha whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She couldn't believe it. They had the smoking gun. But we have to make sure this doesn't get buried. Diane nodded. The Bar Association is already under pressure to conclude the investigation, but now we have the leverage to force them to act. But we can't go public with this evidence until we're sure we're ready. We don't want to put ourselves in a position where it backfires. Tasha's mind raced. The stakes had never been higher. She knew that releasing this evidence could be the tipping point, but she also understood the risks. The backlash could be severe. There were powerful forces in play, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. But for Tasha, there was no turning back. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. The next few days were a blur of activity. Tasha and her team worked tirelessly to verify the documents and prepare for the next phase of the investigation. The Bar Association had no choice now but to confront the truth, and it was clear that Judge Thompson's days on the bench were numbered. Finally, the day arrived when the Bar Association made its official announcement. Tasha stood at the podium once again, this time with a sense of finality. The bar had voted to suspend Judge Thompson, while a full inquiry into his conduct was launched. The evidence of his bias was undeniable, and the message was clear. No one was above the law, especially not those who held the power to determine the fate of others. As the reporters bombarded her with questions, Tasha felt a rush of emotion. She had done it. The system wasn't perfect, but it had taken a step toward accountability. For all the obstacles she had faced, for every moment of doubt, this victory was proof that change was possible. Later that evening, as Tasha sat alone in her office, she reflected on everything she had been through. She had stood up for herself, yes, but more importantly, she had stood up for everyone who had ever been wronged by a biased system. And while the battle was far from over, she knew that the fight for justice was always worth it. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, she truly believed that change was not just a dream, it was becoming a reality. Tasha Williams had not only won a case, she had sparked a movement, and that movement would continue long after the headlines faded. She had shown that one person, when determined and brave enough, could change the course of history.